Burtin. I am an anchor, reporter, and producer at WANE 15, and I have the honor of being here at the Hobnobbin Film Festival, moderating this panel with these awesome ladies here. I will allow you both to introduce yourselves, if you like.
Hello, my name is Myla Rogers, and I work for Early Childhood Alliance. I am the Quality Improvement Manager there, and I work in the early childhood field and absolutely love it.
And I'm Angelica Pickens. I am a anchor and investigative reporter at ABC 21. And I have a crazy 3-year-old that I have running around. So I love him.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. So I had the privilege to watch the films before I came, so I kind of had some questions ready and everything. But I wanted to start off with just hearing you all's stories and just getting to know a little bit more about your journeys. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Sure. So, I'll start by saying a lot of what the film talked about is, as far as assuming that you will have a kid and get pregnant is very true. And I never questioned if I would have a kid. Someday that'll just happen. And it wasn't a challenge. I didn't have to try or, it just kind of happened. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll figure this out. So in 2018, I got pregnant. In 2019, in January, I had my son. The pregnancy was actually really easy. But I will say towards the end of the pregnancy, and why a lot of it, and I'm sure we'll get into it later, a lot of what they say resonated with me is certainly when it came to choosing doctors. I did want a Black woman doctor. I've heard horror stories about doctors not listening. And towards the end of my pregnancy, I had preeclampsia, high blood pressure. And so I had to be induced, which didn't work, and it ended in a C-section. I didn't have a doula or anything like that. But I think that part was the hardest part of the pregnancy. But he's here, and he's fine, and I'm fine. But certainly can relate to a lot of the stories that we saw on both documentaries, for sure.
So I would say for me, both documentaries were very emotional for me because my story is embedded in both of them. With the first document, I will go back. I was a college student in a small town that was predominantly Caucasian. And to put things in perspective, within this small city, African American students were told not to go on a certain side of town after dark because of what could potentially happen to us. And so I just wanted to put that perspective out there to understand some of the systemic racism that I went through with being a young college junior in college, 21 years old, finding out that I'm pregnant, no family around me. My family was here in Fort Wayne. And pretty much going through that whole process by myself. I remember being 5.5 months pregnant, finding out, 5 months pregnant, finding out that I was having a girl, still processing through oh my God, I'm going to be a mom. I had my ultrasound, everything was fine. Go 2.5 months later, 7.5 months pregnant, I started feeling ill and consistently going to the doctor and calling the doctor and saying, I'm not feeling well, something's wrong. And I, for about 2 weeks, continued to tell the doctor that I'm not feeling well. Oh, we feel the baby's heartbeat. Oh, you're fine. Your blood pressure's fine. You're okay. And so it was almost in a sense like I did not feel like I was being heard. as to what was going on. I knew my body, and I knew something was not right. I knew I felt my baby moving and all the above, but something was just not right. And so I remember calling my mom and just saying, Mom, I need you to come get me because they're not listening to me. Came home for a week. By the end of the week, I was so sick to the point I called my mom and I said, if you don't come get me and take me to the hospital now, I feel like I'm gonna die. She came and got me, and we went to Parkview, and immediately they did an ultrasound. And within the ultrasound, they did not find the baby's heartbeat. And they asked me, like, how far along are you? And I tell them 7.5 months, and they're like, there's no way. Your baby stopped growing at 5.5 months. Mind you, I'm still going to the doctor, getting measured, all the above, everything is fine. And I'm hearing and trying to take in all of this information, and I was in denial like the entire time. And so for me, that process was I had to be induced, and I literally had to go through the whole birthing process and delivering a stillborn baby. And so even with that, I did not believe that my child had died within me. I was believing God because I was a Christian, and I'm like, no, this is not happening, to me, because all I've ever known is I wanted to be a mom. Now the timing was off, but that's what I've loved kids all my life. And so I went through the process, and I delivered Sierra, that was her name. Got to spend hours with her until I was ready to release her. The biggest thing for me was being on a maternity ward and having your child, and I'll go back. They actually told me that there was no way that they heard my baby's heartbeat because my body was septic, because my daughter was rejecting my body. And so they were like, there's no way that they heard your baby's heartbeat a week ago. So I ended up being in the hospital for almost a week just because of the toxins that were in my body. In that process, got released. And all this time I'm preparing myself to go through birth, go through pregnancy and leave the hospital with a baby. And I left the hospital being wheeled out with a box. And so for me, it was traumatic. There was nothing given, nobody talked to me about grievance counseling, going to counseling or anything like that. So here I am, this young lady trying to figure out life. Like, what do I do? I've got my own apartment back in, where I'm going to school at. School is getting ready to start in 2 weeks. Like, what do I do? And we even had a graveside funeral, all the above. I decided to go back to school 2 weeks later because I felt like if I stayed here that I was going to literally go crazy. Again, I felt like nobody understood what I was going through. And so for me, keeping busy was dealing with it in a sense. And so 2 weeks later, I'm packing up things, and my mom was like, I can't believe you're going back. And I'm like, I have to go. I have to do something. I can't sit here. I will literally go crazy. And she worried about me, but I tell you what, that was the best semester that I ever had in college. But a part of my healing process was having to tell people when they asked, oh, so you had the baby? And then I had to tell them that I lost my daughter. And that was hard because some days I walked through campus like a zombie, literally like a zombie. And for years I grieved the loss of my daughter. Um, then choosing the field of being in early childhood. So I'm going into my job and I'm having to hear babies and I'm working with babies and, all the above. It has been a journey. For years, I would grieve from mid July until the end of August because her death date was August 1st. It was not until 5 years ago. I remember my aunt passed away from cancer the same day, 5 minutes away from when I lost my daughter. That day, I remember going to Show Park and praying and crying and saying, God, I cannot, I can't handle this burden of grief anymore. I need you to take this away. And that day, it was like the Holy Spirit speaking to me saying, you will never grieve your daughter's death again, but from this day on, you will celebrate her. And so this year, I actually had one of my mentees, because I mentor teen moms. She encouraged me to actually do my balloon release at my daughter's gravesite. I had never gone back to the gravesite since the day that I buried her. And so this year was the first year I actually did a balloon release at her gravesite. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. So there's so many good nuggets in it that. But one thing that stuck out to me is that you said you mentor teen moms now. Do you feel that your experience that you've been through has now helped your purpose as far as what you pour into others now?
I really believe so, on a variety of different levels. So I mentor teen moms, but even looking at the documentary where it talks about doulas and midwives, I mentor with Young Lives, and the coordinator is a doula, and we have a nurse who is a mentor that is a midwife. So we are able to give other options to young teen moms, to allow them know that you can do a birth plan. There are different things that you can do as far as your birthing plan and what options are out there. So I love that. I love the fact that I'm able to empower them. I wasn't a teen mom, but I was, pregnant young. And so I'm able to tell my story, and my story empowers them to want to be great moms, if that makes sense. Like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to do my best as being a mom because my mentor didn't have the opportunity of being able to have her child. So it puts things into another perspective for them.
Yeah. You both mentioned your doctor's not believing you, which is very ironic because my mom had the same experience with my younger siblings, and it's something that is more common than it should be. And I spoke with one of the producers of one of the films last night, and she was talking about the implicit bias and how it's huge everywhere in education, in the medical field, and things of that nature. So, Angelica, I'll direct this to you. Where do you think we are now as far as being taken seriously when we say we're experiencing pain, and why do you think that we're not taken serious?
It's a loaded question, right?
Yes.
But I think, so for me, my OBGYN was a black doctor, and I was intentional about that. My pediatrician is a black doctor, and I was intentional about that. And I think that, but when I did go into the hospital, She wasn't, I went in on a weekend, so there were other doctors that were there that were not her. And she gave me specific instructions when she saw that my blood pressure was rising over the last couple of weeks. And she said, if it goes over whatever, then go into the hospital. When I called the nurses, the nurses that were on call that Saturday, it was a snowstorm, a lot, and she, I said, well, my doctor said if it's over whatever, I need to come in. It was 180 something over 90 something. And she said, I need to come in. And so the nurse said, oh, well, it's snowing outside. I said, no, my doctor said that I need to go in. When I got to the hospital, they acted like it was crisis mode, right? Like, they're like, no, you're in here. They're patting up the side of the bed. They thought I was going to have a seizure. How do you feel? Can you see okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I didn't feel bad. But my blood pressure was high. So that to say, the doctors and nurses that were handling me at that point were not my doctor, and they weren't as serious about what I was going through as my doctor was and how she instructed me to handle it moving forward. What I will say is that I think that the more that people talk about this, the more that doctors are going to pay attention. I think even recently we talked about, there was a story about maternal death rates during childbirth and soon after. And so I think it's getting more attention. And I'm not saying that, going to someone who's not a Black doctor would have meant that, it was over for me. But there's a certain comfort level in someone that is well versed in the challenges that we face and the fears that we have. And like they mentioned in the film, a lot of, culturally, there's a distrust when it comes to, doctors and going to the doctor and are they going to treat me okay? And, you don't want to be this science project or whatever. And, are they really listening to my concerns? And a lot of second guessing. I think that there's probably a long way to go with it. And I think that that's why, like they mentioned, a lot of women or men choose Black doctors, Black therapists, Black counselors, because we know a certain struggle in a different way than maybe a white therapist would know. I don't know if that answers your question. I was rambling, but
yes, it did. It did. Myla, I would direct the same thing to you.
It happens a lot. It's still happening. And it doesn't even matter what your educational status is. I've sat on platforms within the last year of people who have had PhDs and who are dealing or have dealt with the same thing. I think that there are platforms that are being built that are happening within our community and with our state that is bringing attention to the maternal rate and infant mortality. That happens to be some of the work. It's just wild how God does things. How I'm placed in some of those things, some of the work that is happening. So I think there's an awareness, but it's just beginning. Mm-hmm. There's lots of work to do.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of work to do, how do we begin to rebuild that trust with the medical system? Where do we even start? How do we even tackle that situation? And I'm asking for myself because I don't know.
I would say platforms like this, opportunities like this. Naturally, and I'll just put this out here, a couple years ago, the early childhood field shifted and changed, and I was blessed to be able to stay with my organization, and I didn't know exactly what my job was going to be. Ended up getting a grant, and the grant happened to be infant mortality. I was told that this was going to be my job, and I literally bucked against it but I never said why. And I remember one day sitting in my supervisor's office having our one-on-one, and she's like, "Why are you resisting this process?" And I had to open up and tell my story. And I had to say, so this happened to me, you know, and I wasn't asked to do this. I was told to do this. And so again, dealing with grief, it was a process that I had to go through. Now, as I look a couple years down, now where we are now, I've been able to participate in the PIC network, which is prenatal infant, I can't even think of the last thing, but it is a platform where organizations come together and discuss the issues when it comes to childcare, when it comes to maternal health, and all the above. So it's a platform where over 100 people gather every quarter to have conversations about things that are going on in our community or what things need to happen in our community. So again, that's an open door for me to be able to have conversations, tell the stories, advocate for women like me, Black and brown women. When it comes to infant mortality, doing projects within those target zip codes. The '06 zip code at one time had the second highest infant mortality rate in Indiana. Now we're at 4, but it's our Black and our brown babies that are dying from these things. And then another thing is, how does the churches get involved, in some of these things? Silence is like, there are so many platforms, but we need people to advocate in different sectors, city, state, county, whatever it is. But it's going to take people like our experiences, not being scared to be able to share our stories, because the more stories that are heard, the more our voices can be heard. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
The more work can be done. The more money can be put into projects to support these things. The more that doctors will be held accountable when they are showing biases or systemic racism. And a part of it, I think, again, is us knowing that if we're not being treated right, that there are processes that we can take to report doctors, all the above. And so we have to know that information and be confident in moving forward in things even when we feel uncomfortable.
And to piggyback off of what she said, I think that there's certainly a lack of understanding and cultural differences, and I think that that's the biggest thing. And out of that, like you said, advocacy, people that are going to step up and say, having conversations about it. But also something that was said is that I didn't realize, or it didn't even cross my mind, is how many Black women or men, not pertaining to motherhood, but Black people are not, how many of us are participating in the research where we're being counted so that we understand what's going on and why this is happening to our bodies or whatever. So, I think that there's a lot, but when it comes to this not believing, that something's wrong when you're talking to a doctor and things, I think that there's certainly cultural differences in the way that Black women may communicate that a white doctor maybe they feel threatened by that. Maybe they feel, there's certain things that are just different. And I think that there's a lot of training that could go into that. And there's certainly the research component, to me, is a huge one that stood out to me as I watched, those documentaries.
Yes, me as well. I had that written down, that the statistics and how they're not pulling numbers from us to be able to treat us. So we're being treated with different numbers that don't match us. So that was like crazy to me as well. And where do we even begin? So it's like, who is responsible for collecting the data? And why is this population demographic being left out?
Well, and it probably goes back to this kind of vicious cycle too of Black people as a community, not everyone, or have a distrust. So if we say, hey, we would like for you to participate in this study, how many people are going to raise their hand and do it? Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm not sure that I
Right.
have the answer, but that's where the challenge becomes, if someone says, we're trying to study, miscarriages and Black women, am I going to raise my hand and say, okay, so what do you want me to do?
Right.
That's good.
It's a great point because I'm probably going to be skeptical and it would take some convincing and trust built for me to even consider that, which, yeah, I didn't even think of it that way.
And it's historically rooted, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the first film I think you guys watched. They dealt with midwives, and you were telling me how you deal with midwives and doulas and things of that nature. Where do you think we are with education in regard to those type of services that are available to us at home births and having a midwife? And you don't have to go to the hospital. You don't have to use an epidural. Where do you guys think we are with knowing all our options?
I would say it's slowly growing.
Okay.
It's interesting. I used to want to be a nurse or a teacher.
Okay.
And so actually, I've been interested lately in searching out becoming a doula.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is not just for the coaching birthing part of it, but for women who end up in a position where they end up losing their child, because that is a part of the training that goes forth when you want to become a doula. It's crazy how the hard stuff is the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing. So I have been just doing some research, looking into it, listening to conversations from people that I know. And there are a couple African American women here in Fort Wayne who have become doulas or in the process of becoming midwives. And so I've been hearing it more in the last, I would say, 3 years, more than I have ever before. I knew that there was a thing because my grandmother, my family is from the South and from Alabama. And so my mother and her siblings were all birthed. I mean, they had midwives. My grandmother and all 12 of her siblings were born with a midwife. So I remember the stories about that. But just now in the last 3 years, I'm hearing more of that coming back to the forefront.
Which is exciting because it was something that I really didn't know much about. And I'm starting to hear more about it too. So, yeah, I agree.
I would agree with that. And I think a lot of friends that I have also, in addition to, looking at, midwives or water births or just more natural ways to have a baby without doing the epidural, are also the doula is a big piece. And I was talking to someone, it was probably about a week ago, that talked about how, her birth was so easy. Now, it could have been her body, it could have been, there's a lot of factors, but that she had a doula and they taught her how to breathe and to feel her body and understand her body and all these things. And she's like, I had the baby and then I went home and I was cooking dinner and I was like, what? And so, but doulas, I certainly think, are becoming a big part of women and Black women's birth experience. And I see more Black women being interested in becoming doulas and helping to coach women through their births and be the advocate for them throughout their pregnancy, not even just birth. I mean, that's throughout the pregnancy.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you very much, the panel, for being so candid and sharing personal stories of yours, and thank you for bringing the two films and say that I find it appalling that we have the worst maternity and birth rate deaths for babies in the nation. I mean, so that we went from the second to the fourth. Come on, we can do better than that. Women of color deserve better than that. So I applaud what you're doing and hope that we go forward and continue with the energy that you've invested in it to improve the status. We deserve better. You deserve better than that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll find out whether or not you got an award.
Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I know you had asked about like if that knowledge was spreading, if that information was spreading within the Black community. Me personally, I knew that they were an option, but I didn't, and I still don't actually know how to access that option. How do you go about getting a midwife or a doula or that support system?
Ooh, that's a great question.
I believe there's an organization called Journey. I wish I would have brought that information then. If you give me your information, I would love to share that with you. Like I said, there is, I think at least 2 groups here that, doula groups that are here, and some midwifery programs, like offices, like they have been popping up too. Within the Fort Wayne area in the last couple of years. I think Dr. Strad, he has one, and yeah, there's a couple of different ones. But for that information, I would love to get your information, and I can share that with you.
Absolutely.
And I can send it to you or
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah, we can most definitely make that happen. And honestly, I think that's a great question because I can't answer it. You know what I mean? I don't know either. And it's not something that's just out there like a hospital or, different doctors to go to. We know there's Park, we know there's Lutheran, we know there's Duke.
Yeah.
We don't know where to start, where to go to.
And that's why I ended up having my birth in a hospital, and it didn't go well. I wasn't listened to or heard. I was basically told that I wasn't in labor until he finally believed me 5 hours later, and I was halfway there. Like,
Wow.
after he finally believed me, my son came 3 hours later. Like,
Wow.
so I absolutely am still interested in, finding that information and
Yeah.
uplifting it as a support option. It's important to me.
Wow. Well, yeah, we'll definitely find it for you because I think that's important to know, period, where your options are. And I don't understand why it's not something. Well, I can't speak and say it's not because I don't know. I'm not a mother. But I don't think it's something that they tell you when you go for your first checkup. Hey, these are the options available to you. These are the doulas. These are the midwives. This is a list of these type of people. I don't know for sure, but I've never heard that as a thing. And I don't know why it's not a thing. It would be nice if it was.
I think that would absolutely be helpful. That was not my experience either, but that would be so helpful if they were just willing to throw that out there because I needed some support.
Yeah. Okay. We'll figure that out for you.
I appreciate it.
Is there any other?
I just wanted to say your stories are amazing, and I think it
They
speaks
are.
to just how strong women you guys are that you can say, you can share your stories without wavering too. While you're, that's just amazing. And I guess I'm just wondering what can white women do to advocate for you without, aside from just listening to you, what can we do to advocate for you about this situation?
I would say also doing the research, knowing what is happening, knowing and hearing the stories of what women of color have gone through so that when you're sitting at a table, I may not be at a table. We may not be at the same tables, but you don't have to be a woman of color to advocate for this. And a lot of times, I'm the only woman of color sitting at a lot of these tables. And so when the opportunity comes for me to be able to have conversations or to raise questions, I'm not afraid, because it's not just for me, it's for my other sisters that, are behind me, or that are, for my nieces and my great nieces, my friends. And so when I'm sitting at tables, I'm having those conversations to support and affect what their process or their journey will be like. And so the biggest thing is, I would encourage everybody to research, get the information, and when the opportunity comes, don't be afraid to speak up.
Is there anyone else? Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming and sharing your stories.